this is a tour of how I do package management in Emacs, which is probably a bit of a demented way to do it, but it works pretty good for me, and it keeps me in control of my dependencies. I'm a little paranoid about pulling in things from across the eLisp ecosystem, so I try to have a bit of artifact management that sits in the middle before I start yoking stuff into my Emacs. Because it runs my entire life, it'd be bad news if I pulled in some eList that I hadn't vetted first. Oh great, my dogs are barking. So the main working components are I use something called quelpa, which is somewhere in between uh, packages.el and straight.el. So quelpa sits nicely in the middle where it gives you control over where and how you source your packages and where they're built from, but without all of the, which I think is kind of overkill, all of the control that something like straight.el gives you. It's just something I don't use. I think straight's more if you're heavily contributing back to your upstream packages. I think straight makes a lot of sense. But I think for most folks, quelpa is probably the better fit. But that's just a personal opinion. Anywho, so what I do is I have public repos. Let's see. Melpa. There we go. So I have my own fork of the Melpa repository, and then if you're not familiar with how Melpa works, it's essentially just a cache of package builds that are served from the web, and they're built off of package recipes, and package recipes are just an S expression that have all the metadata that you need to put together a package. Like here's where the source code lives, these are the files I need out of the source code, and then yoke them all together into a nice little Emacs package, right? So that's happens through something Melpa refers to as recipes. No. Right, so these are all the recipes in Melpa. So for example, if I open up this, you see that it's a very straightforward expression that says, hey, this package lives at this GitHub repo, and this is the package name, right? So what you can do then is point quelpa, which is one of these build my package from this source type solutions. You can point that at, you can provide custom recipes to quelpa, right? Now I'm a little lazy, so what I do is I actually point all of quelpa to my fork of melpa, and more specifically, I instruct it to fetch not from recipes, but from my vetted recipes. And vetted recipes are basically packages that I've manually vetted in terms of their contents, and I do this whenever I update a package from its upstream, and that way I kind of stay in charge of the artifacts that I pull into my Emacs. So for example, my quelpa config. Let's see, Emacs config quelpa. Right. So this is my quelpa config, and you see that even the quelpa bootstrap itself happens from my GitHub namespace, and then here you see it getting configured for my better recipes out of my fork of melpa, right? And then these vetted recipes, you'll note that they're all pointing at my GitHub namespace. So I fork every package I use and every dependency of those packages into my, hey mama, that's my dog. Well, one of them anyways. Hey, well, go to your place. And so everything gets served out of my GitHub namespace, my own GitHub namespace. So that puts me nicely in control of all the packages that get installed. And so what's the advantage of that? Well, a couple of things. First of all, I'm completely in charge of any change management that happens in my emacs stack, which is nice. I also, if something does happen upstream in the ecosystem, it doesn't immediately impact me in some sort of way. I'm also pretty conservative about updating stuff. I'm kind of the opinion that if stuff's working fine, it doesn't really need to be updated unless there's some security issue that's exposed. Even on my regular systems, I usually only update things that are exposed to the world, like web browsers and any services that might be running. But if something's stable and it's working well and it's doing what it's supposed to do, then I don't really update it that much. So like every couple of months, I'll spend a couple hours and go through and update my upstreams, and I'll do that. That's my lovely wife Darlene singing to the dogs in the background. So anything else that would be interesting to talk about? Yeah, I guess to show you how Quelpa, if you're not familiar with it, works. Emacs config. Let's see. This package bootstrap. Right. So the way I have my configuration set up is all my use package configurations are composed into this elist file, and so every use package config has its own dedicated file, and I like that because it allows me to compose kind of functionality really quickly. I don't enjoy the whole literate programming approach to Emacs configuration. I think it's a lot of overhead for little gain, as long as you keep your config organized and composable. I think a lot of the advantages of literate programming for your configuration you can also get by just having an organized config to begin with, where your config is kind of self-documenting in a lot of ways anyways, because that's kind of the whole idea, right? Everything is self-documenting in Emacs and eList for the most part. So for example, let's see, what's a good one? So if I look at my let's look at my trap config. Well, that's actually a built-in, so let's find a Quelpa one. Where's Magit? There you are. So if we look at my Magit config, you see that it's pretty straightforward. It just says this is the Quelpa keyword, right? So that is just indicating that, hey, go use Quelpa. So there's something called quelpa-use-package, which means that you can just specify that you want to use Quelpa in your use package configuration. And you can also specify the recipe directly in here. But in my case, because I have the backend configured to use my melpa fork, it'll look up the package in my melpa and pull that recipe out of my vetted recipes, and then everything kind of happens automatically after that. So that's nice. So that's how my package configuration works, and how I stay in charge of change management and package artifacts in my Emacs. So I hope this was terribly boring, but I know some people are curious about that stuff. So